Shalom and welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you are having a great day. We are continuing our coffee talk. Today's topic is nedivut, also known as generosity. We talk about chesed, we talk about doing good, we talk about being generous. But do we really have a deep understanding, appreciation of what true Jewish generosity is? And I hope that by the end of today, we'll get a deeper appreciation of what it is. Let's just start at the source sheet over here. Let's see if I can tag this in here for you so that you guys can see it as well. Hold on a second. Mechila, share screen. Here we go. Okay. So the verse says as follows. It says over here, and God spoke to Moses saying, speak to the children of Israel that they should take for you a gift, and from every person whose heart motivates him, Lev asher yidavenu, you should take my gift and let them build me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in their midst. V'shechanti betocham. This is a famous verse in Exodus that talks about the Jewish people preparing to build the tabernacle, and God asks for the Jewish people to come out and be generous and to make their contributions towards the construction of this building. Now, what does it mean to be generous? What does generosity actually mean? So let's see what Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says. He says as follows. He says that a generous person is a nadiv, right? That's the word to be used over here, right? Nadivenu asher libo yinadev, right? A generous person is nadiv. Musar clearly distinguishes this type of generosity from another kind called tzedakah, which means obligated giving. The word tzedakah comes from the word tzedek, justice. Justice means that I have an obligation to do this. This is law. This is my responsibility. This is what I need to be doing right now. Such as giving maaser or tithing. Nedivut type generosity comes not from obligation nor rational thought nor guilt, but out of an irresistible feeling that stirs deep within us. Without so much as a thought, your heart compels your hand to dig into your pocket. It's a movement of the soul that erupts with the recognition of your direct connection to another soul. I give you because you need, right? And your need is my need. Your suffering is my suffering. I feel one with you, and my response is just to give to you to make sure that you are complete. The overall goal of Musar is to help us really live as the holy souls we are. To move towards holiness, one must yearn for it. One must be propelled by a spiritual willingness of nidivut halev, a generosity of the heart. But because we live in a money-centric culture, we tend to think of generosity only as a question of reaching into our wallets. That's just giving the guy the check. But with all Middot, generosity is a trait of the soul. And so it can find expression in many ways, including how you share your time, how you share your energy, how you share your possessions. When your heart is guided by an open, trusting, voluntary, inspired internal motivation that overflows from the depth of your caring response to the needs of the other, right, or love for another, you will always find a way to respond. If you have the money in your pocket, you give money. If you have no money, but there's food, you give your food. If you don't have the food, you have a home, you give your home. If there's no food in your home, but ideas in your mind, you give helping words. If there are no words in your mouth, but love in your heart, you offer your heart itself. That's how far we go. Meaning it's not about just here, take the dollar, leave me alone. You see that old person, or the person collecting, right? Do you feel a deep sense of understanding who that person is, where they're coming from? That's a different kind of giving than just giving the person the dollar. That's a different kind of gift. Although we are naturally inclined to give, we can act on that inclination only when our heart is open. When our hearts are closed or walled off, we are suffering from a spiritual ailment that Musar calls timtum halev. You know what timtum halev means? Timtum halev literally is a plugged up heart. Instead of being open, flowing, and generous, what do you end up finding? You end up finding a very different world that we live in, right? We end up being sluggish. We're somewhat constipated. We're unwilling at our core. Why does that happen to us? If the heart is generous by nature, how does it flow? How does this flow get to be obstructed so that we live without being generous? And what can we do about it? Meaning, like, how do we get ourselves into a place where we could actually be true lovers of people, where we could actually have a soul that yearns to want to give to the other? Sometimes we end up with Tumtum Alev, a plugged up heart, because we willingly blockade our own hearts. We're not really mindful, aware of how much we need to work on being true lovers and givers. We build up barriers to separate ourselves from others. In India, you hear all kinds of stories of individuals that end up talking about how there are these beggars who earn a fortune, who make so much money from just begging, right? You heard stories of mothers mutilating their children so they can be more successful at begging, and so on and so forth. These stories are, some of them are untrue, some of them are true, but in populations of 1 billion people, right? A high proportion of whom are poor, it's just isn't necessary to create a physical ailments that make people into beggars. But stories like these, they circulate throughout the world because they're useful for building a wall around the hearts of people. Why should I give? Why should I be concerned about that guy? That guy's not really sick. That guy's just a faker. So we fear the sensitive heart won't be able to bear the full onslaught of the massive amount of suffering that's going around. Look what's happening right now in Ukraine. How many of us are moved to get up and do something? How many of us have sent clothing or money or thoughts, prayers? How many of you are willing to take in refugees right now into your homes and help? How many of you would have wanted the same exact thing on the other end? If your families were stuck in a place where they were needed of help, right? What would you want from the world? What would your response be? Now, it's true that the heart is difficult to move, but there's no question that it's often fear, the overload, the fear of being overwhelmed, that creates this rationale from turning our hearts away from those people that are in pain. Can you see any ways in which you build walls around your heart? Do you rationalize rather than commit to the effort in making yourself being a generous person, building relationships for people that need generosity? What reason do you give yourself to turn away? What do we think about when we see, that guy is for sure a faker? That guy's asking to that guy, he's driving a fancy car. What do we tell ourselves to rationalize not giving to the people around us? Can you think of a situation where someone might benefit from your generosity, but you maintain the comfortable cutoff from them by the wall that you created for yourself? How are you being mindful of the distances, the rationales that you have in your mind for not giving? Is there someone that you work with that is in need? Is there someone in your community, your synagogue, that you feel like is in need, but you don't want to get involved because you only have a working relation with that person? It's a communal relationship. I don't want to get my hands messy, right? Or is there someone at your school who seems lonely, or in your synagogue who's super needy? What barriers keep you from reaching out to offer what you can? Can you overcome those barriers? Can you be generous? What is it, in fact, that is holding us back? If you're not asking the questions, if you're not clarifying what it means to be generous, you lose out the ability of expressing the most generous parts of your soul. It's not a natural phenomenon to want to give. The natural default setting that we all have is to be concerned about yourselves. Be concerned about your families. Forget about the world right now. You got to take care of yourself. I have to take care of my mental health. I got to take care of my physical health. I got to take care of my spiritual health. I don't have time to give to you. And the mistake that we're making, you'll see this shortly, is that giving is part of your mental health. Giving is part of your spiritual development, and giving is part of your physical health. So, Yisrael Salander says as follows. He says, close-heartedness isn't all done by us. However, he says, sometimes it is also done to us. Life experience can play its part in shutting down the heart. The heart wants to be open, but sometimes it's just not capable in the face of brutal battering as it's been handed. In this case, we can empathize with people's need to close off their hearts. Some people who are just like they were abused. They're in bad situations. They just can't be in a place where they can open themselves up. But yet, it is we who have been the victim, and we accept that situation, and we do a different kind of violence to the heart. When our heart is closed, you are among the first who suffer with that closure. There may be a good reason why it feels too risky to open up. By tolerating that condition, we accept and imposed what we call timtum halev, a plugged up heart. With a walled off heart, our lives will be so much less than they could be, right? Because your life can be so much more enriched by being in a space where you can give to those other people. Most of us know from experience that it feels very good to give. What is it that, considering that generosity doesn't seem to offer the donor any benefit at all? The fact is that when we do give, we receive one of the greatest satisfactions that a human being can know, which is what I think the most profound feeling is being able to connect to the people around us. Our hearts are programmed to connect and to be generous, right? When we do that, my friends, when we actually give, you know what happens? We feel somewhat satiated. We feel full inside. If we create a culture, if we create a community where all we are doing is taking from the world around us, we become less than an animal. Even an animal understands it has responsibilities to give. But to be human means to work on being spontaneous, to recognize the flaws of the heart, to recognize the shortcomings, the weakness of the spirit and the self, to allow ourselves to move into a place where we can become something more. Okay, so the giver gets a different kind of satisfaction, right? When you have a plugged up heart, that, my friends, is an ailment. Every act of generosity, every act of giving dissolves the blocked heart, tears down the wall that blocks the heart from giving, and instead it allows the heart to flow again, right? We need to have open hearts. When you let your imagination run towards being spontaneous, when you allow yourself to feel generous, right, you feel better. Can you think of anything that gets in the way of being generous? What are the fears that come up with giving back? What is it that's holding you back? Can you see how those fears are walls and gates that keep your heart locked up and closed down? Do you recognize that if you're not in control of your emotions, you'll always be stuck? Can you see how accepting those scars as unchangeable realities perpetrates the damage done by the original offense? More common than being abused in the harsh and scarring ways is a tendency to sacrifice the ways of the heart for the needs of the ego. The ego sees the riches of the world as a fixed pie and works to get the largest slice, believing that somebody will end up only with crumbs. All of this works against the heart's inclination to be spontaneously generous. Ask yourselves, do you give spontaneously from the heart, or are you blocked up because of timtum halev, right? What is it that gets in the way? So the one thing that Musar teaches us is to identify the Middot at the source of our ability to not be generous is called yirah, fear. Fear is what blocks off the heart. Fear is what restrains us, right? Fear is what holds us back from being strong givers. Fear is what prevents the scars of giving to remain scars as opposed to healing properly. Okay, so you can expect to be persistent, right? As you look for reasons to not give, you'll find that fear is at the core of your inability to give. Another way is for people to recognize that part of not giving means that you are a slave to your ego. Part of not giving means that you haven't figured out what it truly means to be you. where there's where the inner voice, when there's an inner voice that says, how can I give when I don't have enough for me? Or in marriage, it's often, what have you done for me lately? Right? That's the wrong question. The question in a marriage, in every marriage, should be is, what can I do for you? How can I support you? How can I give more to you? It's not about what I'm taking from the relationship, but rather, what am I giving to the relationship? What am I giving to the individuals around me? Not what I'm taking from. So fear and ego are the two things that get in the way of us having a more generous, meaningful heart. So Simcha Ziv, who was the founder of the Kelm School of Musar, page number 2, number 5, he says, bearing the burden of the other is a profound spiritual practice. Moses, who began his spiritual journey, cocooned in Pharaoh's palace, but ultimately became the greatest prophet by responding to the suffering he saw around him. He says he saw their suffering, the Torah tells us, and he had a formative impact on the development of his soul, with the idea of bearing the burden of the other. The spiritual method was pointed out to me by his teacher, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. Okay, are you aware of the pain that people have, or are you always thinking about yourself? Recently, I had a situation where a parent and a child, these are older parents, older children, who were having a conversation. The parent was trying to talk about their suffering, and the child said, you think you have it bad, I have it worse. Not being in a space where they can even hear their parents' need for their support. Not being in a space where they can even be aware that their parent is in a place of pain. Because you're so absorbed with the self, there's no room for anyone else. That is ego blocking the heart. Okay? That's the most painful thing in the world, for the parent to look at a grown child over the age of 40 not being in a place to recognize their parents' pain and hurt. But if you were like Moses, who was looking to understand the world around him, opened himself up, he left the palace, left the comforts and the luxury of the Egyptian elite, because he was more interested in understanding the needs of the people, right? It transformed him forever. If we spend a little bit of time recognizing that the things that holds us back from expressing true generosity is ourselves, you will find new opportunities to live a life of meaning every moment. Every moment is an opportunity of giving love back to the world. It's an opportunity of helping those people that are in need. It's an opportunity of bringing smiles on people's faces. Raisel Salanter says as follows, number 6, the spiritual, I love this line. He says, the spiritual is higher than the physical, but the physical needs of another are an obligation of my spiritual life. In order that I can follow my spiritual path, I have to pay attention to the physical needs of others. Generosity would be one of the most accessible ways to do that. How do I become aware of another person's needs? My spiritual development is tied into my awareness of your needs. The midah that helps us get there is called nedivut, generosity. To have a nediv lev, a generous heart, means opening the heart up to the potential of other people's needs. That's simple. America happens to be one of the most generous countries in the world. But the kind of generosity we're talking about is something much more profound. If you heard Rabbi Farhi's breakfast in the class this morning, he gave over this great mashal. He spoke about Nedivut this morning. My class was scheduled before. I don't know if he planned it the same way. We don't do these things on purpose. But he gave this great example of he said that America, there was some village that needed help, and they decided that the best way to help that village is by giving them computers. They were the laptops. They had some ridiculous number of laptops they were sending. They sent the laptops to this village, and they were really helpful for the first 4 hours until their batteries ended up dying. The village didn't have electricity, right? So helping them with laptops to solve their problems wasn't a real solution, right? To be a real giver is understanding what the person needs and giving them what they need, not what you think is going to help them. To have a nedivut, to have a generous heart, isn't just here's $1, go. Sometimes a person doesn't need your money. Many years ago, I used to work at the Hillel House at Brooklyn College, and there was one beggar that always, it was a Jewish guy, it was a for sure a drug addict, older man. I spoke to every time I was there, offered my help, whatever it is. And I remember seeing him take a sandwich from someone. I was outside tabling, looking for Jewish people to pull into my programs. And I saw him tabling. I saw him take a bagel, and he ate the bagel. Anyway, 20 minutes later, someone else comes by and offers him food, and he takes it. Now, I know that he had breakfast at the Hill House. I know he just had lunch at and he's gonna have dinner at one of my programs later. I asked him, I said, why did you take the food? You didn't need it. Why didn't you tell him that, no, I'm good? So this is what he says, this is from a beggar's perspective. He said that he took the person's food because he needed to continuously perpetuate this narrative that he's always hungry. Otherwise, if he doesn't feel, if people constantly see him rejecting food, they're not going to take him seriously. That philosophy comes from someone who lives in a world where we don't open our hearts up to see the needs of the person. It's only when he's in that extreme state of constant hunger that we got to help the guy. But let's say the guy has his lunch already, he needs something for later. Are we open enough to give that guy the money, the food, so that he can take care of himself later, or is it only right now? How open are our hearts? Or are we too afraid of being taken advantage of? You see, the reason why we're afraid of being taken advantage of is because we don't believe in justice. We don't believe that our good deeds will be rewarded. We buy into this notion that I have what I have and that's it. My friends, you have to understand that everything that we have is a gift. I don't control what I have. All I can do is open my heart up to the people around me, to the Almighty, and allow Him to fill my life with Tov. I got to do my part, God has to do His part. I promise you, there's no act of Tov that is not rewarded. I promise you that when you open up your hearts to have a heart that is truly generous, every act of generosity will be rewarded. You'll see it coming. I've seen it true in my lives. I'm confident you'll see it in yours as well. Rabbi Nachman on the bottom of page 2 says, anyone who does not practice generosity has a heart of stone. Don't think too much about it. Don't analyze. When opportunity to be generous presents itself, no inner debate is called for. He says, pull a Nike, just do it. That's how you thaw a frozen heart. Each act of generosity works to pry open the heart a little, like clearing a blocked stream, one pebble at a time. The flow of spontaneity is then freed to follow. It might seem paradoxical to aim to have your generosity impact your own soul, since that would appear to give a reward to the giver. It's not so. The magic of generosity rewards all. In Hebrew, the phrase, v'natnu, and they shall give, is spelled vav nun taf nun vav. It's a palindrome, a word that is spelled the same way backward and forward. Such is the flow of generosity. Whatever you give will come back, the boomerang effect. It isn't enough just to give money or an object. God wants us to give our hearts. Wrapped up in our hearts are the inner qualities that can adorn our generosity, with your gift being just a thing, or will be accompanied by empathy, commitment, love, and other soul traits that you have the power to cultivate in yourself. When you undertake to give your heart, you change an element of yourself. With each act of generosity, you make yourself into more of a giving, empathetic, committed, or loving person. And when you change yourself, you change the world. Ultimately, the reward we reap for generosity is the wonderful experience of the presence of God dwelling among us. V'shechanti b'tocham. That's what God wants. You want God to dwell within your family. You want God to dwell in your community. Are you living amongst people whose hearts are open? Are you building a home whose heart is open to the empathy and the needs of the people around you? If it's not, my friends, you are part of the walking dead. This is a unique opportunity to open yourselves up to become individuals who love life, who love giving, who love the beauty of the world around us. You miss out on that power of opening up your heart. You miss out on the opportunity of seeing so much of the depth of the world around us. So this is the homework for this week, okay? There's something called making a Kabbalah. Making a Kabbalah is similar to like making an oath, right? But a Kabbalah is an exercise that a person takes or is assigned that is designated to cause change in a certain trait, in a certain midah. Like all exercises, the idea is to strengthen a muscle. But in this case, the muscle is not a physical thing, but a soul trait. The theory is simple and clear. If you want to become a patient, practice. If you want to become patient, practice patience. If you want to become more grateful, practice gratitude, and so on. A Kabbalah can focus on any midah itself, right? With the action, the external motion meant to stimulate and recalibrate that particular trait, right? The internal motion. A Kabbalah is usually measurable in some way. So in some way, you might do like 10 sit-ups or 3 laps on a track, right? You work out your Middot according to the same sort of schedule. With this model in mind, your homework this week is to take on a Kabbalah that you will help to cultivate the trait of generosity. This is the hardest week to do it. It's right before Pesach, right? You have 1,000 things you need to do for yourself, but this is the greatest week to do it. Think about what you can do for the others. The assignment is simple. Do 3 generous acts every single day from now until Pesach, right? You do what you can to be a mindful giver. You're going to find that some opportunities are going to come your way naturally with absolutely no effort, right? Like when you get an email that says we're in desperate need of a donation, right? Or you see a poor person who is in need, right? Do whatever you can to give. But when you take on the practice of doing 3 acts of generosity every single day for the next 10 days, there are going to be days where you're going to have to actually be mindful and seek out opportunities to give, okay? This sounds somewhat simple, but you'll be surprised at how difficult it can be. It's so hard when you're working on something, when you're being mindful of something, when you're being conscientious of something. It always makes it much more difficult to actually succeed. In the Talmud, we read that a person who gives a small coin to a poor person receives 6 blessings, right? And one accompanies the donation with the counseling word, receives 11 blessings. So that means giving tzedakah, here tzedakah, versus here tzedakah and have a great day. Not 6 blessings, but 11 blessings. It's all about opening your heart. Reflect on someone you know that could use something that you have to give, including your warmth, support, and encouragement. Take 1 minute to strategize. When you give, say and or do encourage and strengthen that person, what can you do to make that person better? What can you do to help that person become something more profound? Sometimes just a few simple words work a tremendous amount of magic. Okay? To help your effort and be more effective, develop a plan that includes a diversity of offerings. You can offer written notes, emails, small gifts. Right? Once you have put all these ideas on your plan, implement it. And I'm telling you, you'll see that if you do this for him, you'll be tired, you're strapped for cash, you're embarrassed, whatever it is. Nidivut is all about spontaneously tending to the needs of others. Okay, to become more aware of others' needs, and then to give without expectation of reward, recognizing a compensation of any sorts. Use your accounting of the soul, your diary to record your experience of Kabbalah. The more you give, the more notes you take of your giving, the more you're able to add into your journal, the more you will find reward and success. So let's just review very quickly. The natural setting of the heart is to be somewhat selfish. We are born that way. You ever meet children that are spontaneously generous? No. Children are only thinking about themselves. Children are only thinking about what they can take from the world around them. They are never thinking about what they can give back. They're never going to spontaneously give back. As a matter of fact, there were studies done on children's ability to give. So for example, let's say you want to get your child to clean the room. You could go in there and say, clean the room, and stand there and watch them clean the room. Be mindful that when you do that, you're depleting your child's ability to give. You're depleting your child's ability to listen to other things. Better than telling your child what to do, help them clean the room, do it with them. Do an exercise, make it easier for them. Keep doing that over and over again so you build a habit where they do it themselves. Not everyone can be in a place where they can give back to you, but this avoda is different. This avoda is not about you giving back. This avoda is not about you taking or asking people to do for you. This avoda is asking, what can you do for the people around you? How can you be helpful? How can you be in a space where you can make it easier for someone else? Are you always generous? Are you always kind? Are you always loving? Are you always accepting? Or are you always finding excuses not to be a giver? If that is your default setting, if your default setting is, nah, today, maybe tomorrow, I'm feeling tired, it's raining outside, I don't want to go anywhere. That was definitely my thought this morning when I woke up and I missed my train. And I drove into the city instead. I'd much rather stay in bed. But I come to do the things that I do because I love doing it. I love being in a place where I can be a giver. I love being in a situation where I get 100 phone calls and people are like, can you help me, can you help me, can you help me? And my answer is yes, 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 yes. And if I can't, we'll find someone that can. That is ultimately someone who is trying, at least, to have a heart that is generous. A heart that is generous comes from someone who is proactively working on opening his or her heart to be aware of the needs of the people around you. I can't always give $1. I can't always solve a problem. I can't always, be in a place where I can be in that position where I can just give back. But I can always give a kind word. I can always have a smile on my face. I could always be in a position where I'm being conscientiously aware of, I need to put myself into a place where I can help this other person. That is the avoda for this week, and that's it today for Coffee Talk. We are not going to have a class next week. It's Erev Pesach. I will do a couple of small talks preparing you for Pesach, some ideas to help you have more meaningful Pesach, but it won't be a Coffee Talk series. We'll pick up sometime right after the holiday. Wishing you an amazing week, a Shabbat Shalom, and a Chag Kasher Sameach.